to Antwerp, Belgium, where even his printer worked undercover.
He presented himself not only as Martinus Keizer or Merten de Keizer or Martin l'Empereur, which was his real name, but he also called himself Balthazar Bekend, Balthazar you know who, Adam Anonymous, Adam you don't know who, and various other names.
For an illegal printer and an English heretic on the run, Antwerp was a good place to be. Just across the North Sea from England, it was one of the largest ports in Europe and had a sophisticated English merchant community. It was also a fiercely independent city. Protestants were safe there as long as they kept under the church's radar. Best of all, the printing industry in Antwerp was massive. The city had 5 times as many printers as London. They printed books in huge numbers, and if there was a chance to make money, they didn't care too much about the law.
It was a cat-and-mouse game, actually, with the Inquisition. It was a matter of smuggling. It was a matter of hiding the tiny leaves of these illegal books between the large leaves of books that were not forbidden. And they were stored here in the Antwerp warehouses and then shipped to England.
Books smuggled into England by boat could turn a vast profit, and the Antwerp printers were cashing in. Huge quantities of Tyndale Bibles streamed into England. They crossed the channel as individual pages hidden in legitimate books, then were put back together once ashore. They were a hot item, seditious contraband in high demand. But the more popular his books became, the more dangerous life got for Tyndale. He remained in exile, always at risk of capture and death. Antwerp was a progressive city, but it was still Catholic, and it only took one person to betray him. Sometime in the spring of 1535, a young Englishman named Henry Phillips arrived in Antwerp. Phillips had good contacts within the expatriate English community and was introduced to Tyndale. The two became friends. On May 21st, 1535, Phillips invited Tyndale to dinner.
He inveigled his way into Tyndale's interest. He pretended a great interest in the details of translating the Bible. He was a horrible man, was Phillips.
The dinner was a setup.
I go forth this night to dinner, and you shall go with me and be my guest.
After 12 years on the run, Tyndale was finally caught. To this day, no one is sure who paid Phillips to betray him. But there is little doubt the plan was hatched in England.
I think his chief enemy in England was the new Bishop of London, John Stokesley. And I think Stokesley was behind this hideous man, Henry Phillips, who was the one who actually trapped him. Phillips wrote to everybody saying, "I need money," and Stokesley must have heard of this and employed him.
Tyndale was taken from Antwerp to a castle near Brussels. He was left in solitary confinement, without even his beloved Bible, for more than a year.
From that moment, what I think is the man with the greatest command of the English language, after Shakespeare, never heard English spoken for 500 days. It'd be Flemish or Latin. 500 days without light, without books, without anything.
There was never a question about Tyndale's fate. In October of 1536, he faced his final ordeal. With death only moments away, he remained committed to his cause. To the end, he prayed for his country to embrace his life's work.
Lord, open the King of England's eyes!
The authorities decided to spare Tyndale the horror of being burned alive by strangling him before the pyre was lit. But as the flames rose around him, he regained consciousness. William Tyndale died without ever hearing his English Bible read on his native soil. He had no way of knowing that only a few months after his death, his wishes would come true, and his Bible would be legalized in England. Ironically, the shift was a matter of paternity, not theology. The man whose eyes Tyndale had hoped to open was the Catholic King Henry VIII. Henry later became most famous for having 6 wives, but at the time, he was still on his first. His queen, however, could not provide him with a male heir, so he desperately wanted a divorce. But the Pope wouldn't grant him one.
Henry did not have good enough representation at Rome, and therefore the church was not going to grant him his annulment. If the church could not grant Henry a legal divorce, he had to find a church that could.
Find one or found his own. Spurned by the Pope, Henry made himself the head of the English Church. All over England lies the fallout from the split, the ruins of medieval Catholic monasteries that were closed by King Henry. Their remains are an enduring symbol of the turmoil of the times. The king's right-hand man in charge of the transformation was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer. But Cranmer had bigger goals than the king's divorce or even a national church. He wanted to endow the church with true Protestant ideals. Just like Wycliffe, Luther, and Tyndale before him, Cranmer placed reading the scriptures in one's own tongue at the heart of his Reformation. And he went further than just legalizing the English text. He authorized the first official English Bible. It was called the Matthew Bible, supposedly the work of a man named Thomas Matthew, but the name was a fake. The Bible was printed in Antwerp, and ornate initials inside reveal who had really done the work. W.T. for William Tyndale. 2 years later came Cranmer's Great Bible. Most of the text was still Tyndale's, but this was the first truly national Bible. By royal command, it was placed in every English church. Every parish in the land was forced to buy one, and Archbishop Cranmer publicly encouraged everyone to read it.
It is convenient and good for the scriptures to be read of all sorts and kinds of people, and in the vulgar tongue. All shall therein find all they ought to believe in, what they ought to do, and what they ought not to do.
Hearing the words of God in English was a powerful revelation for the congregations. Trading Latin for English instantly shifted power away from the clergy, many of whom still clung to their Catholic convictions despite Cranmer's edicts.
Reading the Bible could be a political act, particularly in the early days. Very often, this was turned into an act of defiance against the old church. A mass would be going on at the other end of the church, up at the high altar, and people would stand shouting out the words of the Bible.
And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
What really is going on in that is that essential Reformation declaration that you and I, individuals, stand in front of God. We don't need clergy, we don't need priests. That's in itself a hugely political statement.
Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven.
The changes were dramatic, And Henry was soon having second thoughts. For the rest of his life, he would struggle to find balance for his new church.
If not recognizing the authority of the Pope is being a Protestant, then Henry was a very good Protestant. If it is actually a central belief that you are saved by faith instead of your good works, Henry is not a Protestant. He is very conservative.
The decades after Henry's split from Rome were turbulent ones in England, as Catholics and Protestants struggled for power. Henry died in 1547 and was succeeded by his son Edward. Edward was Cranmer's godson, so the religious pendulum swung towards the Protestants. But King Edward died after only 5 years in power. He was succeeded by his sister Mary, a fierce Catholic. Mary reversed Edward's policies and reintroduced the old Catholic ways. She ordered the burning of more than 300 Protestants, earning herself the nickname Bloody Mary. And she orchestrated the arrest of Thomas Cranmer on grounds of treason and heresy. Cranmer was forced to recant his Protestant beliefs and acknowledge the validity of the Catholic Church. The Catholics wanted to make an example of him for all Protestants to see.
This is the biggest catch that the old church had from any Protestant leader. And now they had him in their grasp. They had a speech prepared for him, which he'd written out himself, which was in print, and that was the speech which he would give from the pulpit in the University Church in Oxford.
But at the last minute, Cranmer cheated his captors by changing the final paragraph.
And for as much as my hand hath offended in writing things contrary to my heart, therefore shall my hand be first punished, for when I come to the fire, it shall be first burned. As for the Pope, I refuse him as Christ's enemy and the Antichrist with all his false doctrine.
In life, Cranmer fought tirelessly for his Protestant beliefs. He went to his death with his convictions held firm and his head high.
Therefore shall my hand be first punished, it shall be first burned.
Cranmer's death was a blow to the Protestants, but 2 years later, Queen Mary succumbed to ill health and was succeeded by her sister Elizabeth. Elizabeth was Protestant, so again, the pendulum shifted. But this time she tried to stop it in the middle. Her church was Protestant in doctrine and use of English texts, but like today's Church of England and the Episcopal Church in the US, it retained many of the forms of the medieval Catholic Church